A special Sunday pre-election edition of Outnumbered for you. I'm so excited. We're here. Democrats could be in some trouble on Tuesday as key voting blocks that delivered for them in the past are now tilting Republican. According to some of the latest polling, they show white suburban women, who make up 20% of the electorate, have significantly shifted their support in the closing days of midterm campaigning. The latest Wall Street Journal poll shows 27% of them moving away from the Democrats, 15% now favoring the GOP. And it's not just white suburban women. A recent NBC Telemundo poll shows Democrats also are losing their advantage with Latino voters in the past 4 years, with a 13-point swing in the GOP's favor. So, Guy, that the challenge is going to be for Republicans now to fill up that gap between the 27 who are leaving Democrats and the 15 who are going to Republicans. That means some people are ready to sit down. So there's still people to go after there.
Yeah, there's always an opportunity to build in addition to what you've already gained. I think the poll showed that Republicans have now taken a 15-point lead among that demographic, which is a huge swing away. We've been talking on shows like this now for months about the Hispanic vote and some of the breadcrumbs that we're seeing in South Texas and elsewhere. Another group that I think we need to talk about are black men, who are really moving, maybe not massively towards Republicans, but even incremental shifts could make a big difference in some really important states. And we've seen already, for example, Stacey Abrams in Georgia sort of blaming that, saying, oh, they're being misinformed and bamboozled into voting Republican.
I'm going to come right back to you because the team, I had asked them to try to find this from Stacey Abrams. Let's play it.
40. Who's doing the polling and who's doing the counting? We have seen record turnout. Black men have increased their participation rates by 52% over 2018. And I do not believe it's because of a deep well of enthusiasm for my opponent. We know that black voters are often discounted. And unfortunately, this year, black men have been a very targeted population for misinformation. Not misinformation about what they want, but about why they want what they deserve. And my campaign has been the only one that has very intentionally, thoughtfully, and consistently reached out. That has been misconstrued as concern when it indeed is just respect.
So how is that as an argument?
Well, I'm not sure it's terribly respectful to suggest that some of the movement that we're seeing in the polling is because this group has been sort of attacked by misinformation. I saw a very similar argument made, I believe, this morning by Keisha Lance Bottoms, who used to be the mayor of Atlanta, was doing such a bad job she decided not to run for re-election. She now has failed upward to the White House. And she was asked about this and again was saying, oh, it's very dangerous, the misinformation targeting black men. They must be seeing stuff in their internal data. They are now pre-blaming some of the losses on, again, misinformation, which I think is just incredibly condescending to people who might just be voting based on what they see as their own self-interest in a year where a lot of things are going wrong and there's one party in charge.
Yeah, I mean, when you look, Tammy Bruce, at the number of men in particular who have come out of this economy, it's something that Steve Forbes and I have talked about in detail. It really does speak to the issue of what might be important to all men, not just black men.
Yes.
And you have such a beautiful point there, Guy. Yes, they are a voting bloc, as the Democrats and others have seen it, but they're also individual Americans who are suffering the same things that other men are suffering in this country right now.
Yes, most of the numbers we're seeing, including direction of the country, what matters, what's the most important numbers, are giant. They're huge. It's 70, 80%. That it reminds us that we're Americans first, that this is a unified country, that our daily lives are similar, our children are similar, our cares for our family in the future are the same, whether you be black, white, Hispanic. But what's missed by the Democrats often is the impact of faith, what certain blocks that they see as people who they've had in the past, that it's a combination perhaps of culture issues, what's happened in schools, the ability and frankly, the recognition that the government is in control of so much, and yet it is failing, that this comes back down to this idea that, yes, back to Guy's point, that they don't think about, having been on the left, that they don't think about the nature of what the individual thinks as a person, that they are just one block that can be controlled, and that they are known intimately. They are not. We are individual people, and boy, this election is going to show that.
Well, look, the head of the snake has told them, and that would be former candidate Joe Biden, remember what he said to black voters. If you don't vote for him, you're not really black.
That's right. That was the beginning of that message, and of the realization that, wait, we're being looked at as some game piece when we're individuals with families, and that heating oil matters and that gas matters, not to the people making the decisions, but in our daily lives. And there is, frankly, the tales of Donald Trump, these coattails where not so long ago we were energy independent. Not so long ago I had a really great job. And that's what matters. That's what they remember.
Well, and talk to black men about that, right, Kellyanne? I mean, when you look at where the economy was under President Trump, former President Trump, yes, we had a pandemic, but for a window there, we had something else we hadn't seen in 50 years. And that was lower unemployment and among black voters in particular, but black men.
And they know that. Look, what strikes me is that the Democrats are bleeding these demographic groups like black voters, particularly black men, Hispanic voters, and suburban women, all for the same reason. It's their inability. I don't know if they're being feckless or reckless, but either way, they're just not addressing crime and inflation and education. Go back to the primary for L.A. mayor between independent former Republican Rick Sanchez, I believe his name is, against Karen Bass, African-American former congresswoman, former state legislator. He beat her among black men by double digits. And so you see that going on, and voters won't be told, you fit into this neat box, you fit into that cohort. And let me just say one more thing. It's not just that the voters are realigning Republican, it's that we have recruited a diverse group of candidates this time. We have more black, Hispanic, female, veteran candidates, Indian American, the whole Native American, both, people who are from, who are immigrants, who were born in Mexico, like the woman in the Rio Grande Valley, Myra Flores. We see this diversity, not just in the electorate, but in our actual candidates up for election.
And even wider, before this election season, you saw the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Winsome Sears, come out, and former military. So many of those boxes that you check just as an American, and then you learn, okay, well, this woman's also black, and so all the things that people have been saying about the GOP, it makes it very complicated. Then, Jessica, I'll give you the last word on this, to segregate the way that politics often can do, and to look at us as a monolithic group of people.
It's incredibly dangerous. I think it's more so for Hispanics, frankly, and we've been seeing that in the deterioration. I mean, Democrats lose in Florida now because they've treated all Hispanic populations as if they're the same. It's shifting over to Texas as well. I'm not as concerned about the black vote. We know that black women are reliable Democratic voters. I don't think that the shift away with black men is going to be as exaggerated as this, but you have Whip Clyburn on your program all the time. He's concerned with this, our friend Antoine Seawright.
Well, he wasn't at first. Because when we first started talking about it, I mean, he didn't call me a liar the way that Senator Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, called me on a different issue. But he wasn't always, seeing this for what it is.
I understand. Democrats see, I think, everything that's going on right now, just based on the ads that I'm seeing cycle through on TV right now, that they understand. One thing that I want to raise, and I cannot believe it, is that nobody is talking about the Asian vote. And it was pivotal in 2020 in steering Georgia and Arizona towards Democrats.
You see the numbers of Asian Americans now going toward Republicans.
That's not my point about it. It's that we don't talk about it, and that is the fastest growing demographic, by the way, in terms of voting.
All right, we're going to scoop, but we'll be right back. What the expected midterm election red wave could mean for Democrats, the policy reversals, the investigations, and the political future for Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, President Biden, and the rest of the party itself. We'll get into all of it. That's next.